The fire crackled softly in the middle of the forest clearing. The flames danced against the dark sky, and a pot of black coffee sat over the low fire. The cowboy sat still, leaning against a tree, his hat low over his eyes, his rifle across his knees. He looked like a man who belonged to the silence, his boots worn, his hands rough, and his face unreadable. No one came this far into the woods unless they were hiding or lost, and he knew someone was coming. He had felt it for the past hour, not a sound in the trees, not even the birds singing, just a strange stillness in the air. Then, a soft crack of a branch. He didn't move, didn't reach for his gun yet, just waited. A figure stumbled out of the trees barefoot, her dress torn, her hair messy and wild. She looked no older than 25, her eyes wide with fear, and her breathing fast. She stared at him like he might kill her or save her, but he didn't speak, just tilted his head and nodded once. Slow and calm, she stepped closer, then fell to her knees, her legs shaking too much to hold her up. He poured her some coffee and set the tin cup near the fire. Not too close, not too far. She looked at it, then at him, then back at the woods behind her. He understood whoever she was running from. She thought they might still be following. Safe here, he said in a low voice. Rough as gravel, but steady like a rock. She looked like she wanted to speak, but her lips trembled. She picked up the cup with shaking hands and drank slowly. She didn't ask who he was, didn't ask where she was. She was too tired, too scared, and too broken to care. When the cup was empty, she held it tight, like it was the only warm thing in her life. The wind picked up a little, and she shivered, her arms hugging herself. The cowboy stood slowly, took off his flannel shirt, and placed it on the ground beside her. He didn't hand it to her, didn't say a word, just returned to his spot by the tree. She looked at the shirt, then slowly wrapped it around herself. It smelled of wood smoke. Horses and something safe. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The fire burned low, but neither of them moved. The woman's eyes started to close, the warmth of the shirt and the fire making her feel heavy. She curled up slowly beside the log, not too close, but not too far either. The cowboy didn't sleep, not even a little. He kept one eye open, scanning the trees, listening to the wind, the leaves. The whispers of the night. He had seen the tracks earlier, big boots, fresh in the dirt, going in the same direction she had come from. She wasn't alone out there. Someone was after her, and if they came to this fire tonight, they would find him waiting. He didn't care about her name, did her story, or why she was running. All he knew was that she was scared, hurt, and someone had put that fear in her eyes. The rifle stayed on his lap, one hand resting on it, calm but ready. The woman didn't know it, but she had just found the one place no one dared cause trouble, because this cowboy didn't believe in asking questions before protecting someone. He believed in action, in quiet justice, in doing what needed to be done. Even if it meant blood in the dirt, as the wind howled through the pine trees, she fell asleep fully at last, wrapped in his shirt, curled near the fire like a child safe from the storm. The cowboy looked at her one last time, then turned his eyes back to the trees. The forest held its breath. Something was coming, and he would be ready. The night before she found the campfire, the forest had been full of fear. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, covering the moon, and the wind carried the sound of her heavy breath. Branches whipped her arms as she ran through the thick trees. Thorns tearing her legs, her bare feet slapped against the cold ground, leaving bloody prints on the dirt trail. But she didn't stop, not even when the pain in her side made her cry out. She was running from a man who had promised to love her then nearly killed her. He had come back drunk, angrier than ever, shouting her name through the trailer walls when she tried to lock the door. Kicked it down and threw her to the ground. She had grabbed the car keys, but he grabbed her hair. When she escaped through the back window, he fired a warning shot in the air. It wasn't the first time he used that gun. It was the first time she believed he might actually pull the trigger next. She ran into the woods without a plan, just raw fear and shaking limbs. The black truck's headlights followed her for a while, then disappeared. She didn't stop to check if he gave up, because she knew he never did. He always said the same thing: "If I can't have you, no one will," and those words were still ringing in her ears. Louder than the wind, her dress snagged on a fence post as she climbed through the underbrush. A rock sliced her knee when she fell, but she bit her lip and kept crawling. She had one thought in her head: keep going. She didn't even know where the forest ended or where the road might be, but she knew that stopping meant he'd find her, and this time he wouldn't stop at threats. Somewhere deep in the trees, she heard the distant crackle of firewood. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks, but then she saw a dim orange glow flickering between the pines. She crouched low, heart pounding, unsure if it was friend or enemy. A shadow moved near the fireman in a wide hat, sitting still as stone. She almost turned away, afraid he might be worse than the one chasing her. But her legs couldn't carry her anymore, and her heart whispered one last chance. She stumbled into the clearing like a ghost, eyes wild, feet bleeding. The cowboy didn't flinch, didn't rise, didn't reach for his weapon. He just looked at her, like he'd been expecting someone to come through the trees tonight. She froze at the edge of the light, caught between running again or collapsing. He gave a slight nod and pushed a tin cup of coffee closer to the fire. The smell hit her first, strong, bitter. Reland, she almost cried, but she said nothing. Not yet. Not until she knew he wouldn't send her back. As she drank with shaking hands, she kept glancing toward the trees. She didn't see the cowboy watching the same shadows she feared. He had seen signs in the dirt-fresh tire tracks, broken twigs, muddy boot prints. He knew someone had followed her, and they weren't far behind. He had quietly placed his rifle across his lap when she wasn't looking. She never noticed, too lost in fear and exhaustion. When she finally lay down and drifted off with his shirt wrapped around her, he stayed awake, watching the dark with a steady gaze. Hours later, long after she slept, a twig snapped in the distance. The cowboy turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. He heard the slow crunch of a boot on wet leaves, and then silence again. Someone was close, maybe 30 yards out, maybe less. He didn't move. Didn't speak, just waited. The night held its breath, and so did he. But nothing came into the clearing, not yet. Whoever was out there was either watching or walking in circles. The cowboy didn't care which. He just sat there, hand resting gently on his rifle, and thought to himself, if you take one more step toward this fire, you'll regret it. Morning light filtered through the trees, soft and cold. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and the forest seemed peaceful again. Birds chirped somewhere far away, but she didn't hear them. She was still sleeping on her side, curled like a child, wrapped in the cowboy's flannel shirt. She held it close to her chest like it was the only safe thing she had left in the world. Her breathing was slow now, not the shallow, terrified breaths she had last night. The cowboy watched her quietly from where he sat against the old pine tree. His rifle rested across his legs, and his eyes looked tired but alert. He had not slept, not even for a second. He had heard footsteps in the woods before dawn, a slow circle around the clearing. Someone had been watching, thinking, waiting. Then the sound faded away. Like the forest swallowed the danger for a moment. He didn't tell her. Not yet. She had enough weight on her shoulders already. When she finally stirred, she didn't open her eyes at first. She pressed her face deeper into the warm fabric of his shirt. It smelled like pine smoke, leather, and something steady, something safe. For a moment, in that half-sleep, she forgot where she was, forgot the gunshot, the running, the dark forest, forgot the man who had chased her, yelling her name like a curse. But when her eyes opened slowly, the memories rushed back. Her throat tightened. The hands started to shake again. The cowboy noticed. He didn't move closer. Didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He just spoke in a calm voice that sounded like the earth itself. You're safe for now. She looked up at him, her eyes red from crying, her voice barely working. Why? Why did you help me? He didn't answer right away. He threw more wood on the fire, waited for the flames to rise. Then he said, because someone had to. She pulled the shirt tighter around herself. It was too big for her, the sleeves falling past her hands, the fabric swallowing her small frame. But she didn't care how she looked. She only cared that she wasn't freezing or alone. She tried handing it back, but the cowboy shook his head.
Oh.
It's yours for now, he said. She didn't know he had blood on his boots from the night before. She didn't know that while she slept, the cowboy had already stopped the man chasing her. She sat near the fire, warming her hands. Her voice was quiet, unsure, but slowly she tried to speak. I didn't mean to run this far. You ran where you needed to run, he replied. That simple sentence made her eyes fill with tears again. No one had ever spoken to her like she had done the right thing. Everyone had always blamed her, or told her she caused trouble. But this stranger in the woods talked to her like she mattered. She looked down at the shirt again. She touched the sleeve like it was something precious. You were out here alone, she said softly. I like the quiet, he answered. But there was more to it. She could feel it. The cowboy didn't hide, but he didn't explain either. You shouldn't stay here long, he said finally. Her heart dropped. Are you sending me away? She whispered. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. I'm saying you shouldn't stay here, this place. He pointed into the trees. His eyes narrowing like he could see something she couldn't. Someone came looking last night. She froze, her fingers gripping the shirt tight enough to tear it. Was it him? She asked, her voice cracking. The cowboy didn't say yes, but the look in his eyes said enough. She lowered her head, breathing fast again. Her heart beat so hard it hurt. Why didn't you wake me? She whispered. You needed rest more than fear? He said calmly. She had no answer for that. No one had ever protected her like that. No one had ever put her comfort before their own worry. The cowboy stood and packed his saddlebag. Not once did he rush her or tell her to hurry, but she understood. Staying here meant danger. Moving meant a chance to survive. She pulled his shirt closer around her thin shoulders, her hands shaking as she stood up on her bare, bruised feet. She wasn't strong. She wasn't prepared. She wasn't ready. But for the first time, she wasn't alone. And she wasn't entirely afraid, because the stranger who saved her was now walking beside her. And she didn't know it yet, but he had already killed to keep her safe. Long before the girl reached the campfire, the black truck had already entered the forest. Its tires crushed the gravel slow and steady. The engine low like a growl waiting to rise. Behind the wheel sat a man with wild eyes and clenched fists. His jaw was tight, and there was a scar across his cheek that looked like it never healed right. He had a bottle of whiskey between his legs and a pistol resting on the passenger seat. The inside of the truck smelled like sweat, smoke, and anger. He had been chasing her for hours, maybe days. He didn't even remember what started the fight this time, just that she had run again, and he couldn't stand that. Not when he believed she belonged to him. He'd always said it, "You're nothing without me." He believed it so deeply. It had become his only truth. He followed her muddy footprints through the back roads, shouted her name from the window, swerving through the turns. When he spotted her abandoned shoes near the fence line, he knew she was close. He killed the headlights and followed the tire ruts as far as he could. Then he got out and grabbed the pistol. The forest swallowed him like it was waiting too. That night, near the clearing, he stepped over fallen logs and moved toward the glow of a fire. He thought maybe some fool camper had taken her in. He thought maybe he could scare her out and drag her home. But what he didn't know was that the cowboy had already seen him. From the shadows, the cowboy waited, his rifle loaded, his breathing calm. He had seen this kind of man before, mean, drunk, and full of fire. But fire can be put out with one shot. The man stepped too close, shouting, "Girl, I know you're out here. You think I won't come get you?" He didn't see the dark figure behind the tree, didn't hear the slow click of a safety being turned off. He walked closer to the clearing, still yelling, still swinging the pistol around like a toy. "I'll burn this whole place down. You think anyone can protect you?" And then the woods answered. A single rifle shot cracked through the trees like thunder. The man dropped where he stood, his body hitting the ground hard. The gun flew from his hand, and silence fell again, heavy and cold. The cowboy stepped forward slowly, rifle still raised. He looked down at the man on the ground and didn't blink. He didn't check for life, he already knew. He picked up the pistol, emptied the bullets, and threw it deep into the brush. He didn't bury the body right away. First, he waited an hour in the darkness, listening for more. Some men travel in packs, and this one didn't look smart enough to work alone. But no one else came, just the wind and the night animals. So before dawn, the cowboy dug a grave near a dry riverbed far from the camp. The dirt was hard, but he worked in silence. Slow and steady, when it was done, he stood over it, removed his hat, and said nothing. Then he covered it with stones and brush, making sure no one would ever find it. He washed his hands in the cold stream, the blood washing away like it had never happened by the time the girl woke up. The cowboy was back at the fire, quiet as ever. He never told her what happened, never mentioned the shot to her. It had just been a peaceful night, but to him, it had been a line crossed to quiet war that ended before it began. The man in the black truck had thought he was hunting, but he became the hunted the moment he stepped too close, and the cowboy, with his still eyes and calm hands, was not the kind of man you crossed and lived to talk about. She would never know how close the danger had come, or how the cowboy had chosen to act without asking permission. She only knew that when she slept in his shirt that night, no fear came to her dreams, because someone had already made sure her nightmare wouldn't return. The sun rose higher through the tall pine trees as they prepared to leave the clearing. The girl held the cowboy's shirt around her like armor, her fingers gripping the soft fabric tightly. She hadn't spoken much since waking, only short answers, only small nods. Her voice felt stuck somewhere deep inside her chest, heavy with fear and memories she didn't want to remember. The cowboy didn't push her. He packed his saddlebag, tied it to the horse, and moved with quiet patience, every motion slow, steady, and respectful. He looked like a man who had learned long ago that silence speaks louder than questions. They walked together through the forest, the ground soft beneath their feet. A thin mist rose from the earth, curling around their legs like cold smoke. She looked at the trees, at the shadows, at the sky, anything to avoid looking behind her. Anything to avoid thinking of the man who once held her like a prize and punished her like an enemy. For a long time, neither of them said a word. Only the sound of the wind moving through branches, only the echo of their footsteps on the forest floor. Then suddenly, her breath hitched, her steps slowed, and her shoulders dropped like she was too tired to carry her secrets anymore. She stopped walking, her back turned to him. The cowboy paused too, but he didn't come closer. He just stood, waiting, giving her space to speak if she chose to. She took a shaky breath, her voice thin like paper. He used to be kind, she whispered. Her words trembled in the cool air. When I met him, he smiled all the time. He brought me flowers, made me feel safe. The cowboy didn't respond, but she felt his attention, calm and steady. Like a blanket over her trembling heart, he changed after the first year. She continued. The drinking started, the shouting, the blame. Her fingers dug into the cowboy's shirt, twisting the fabric like she needed something to hold on to. He told me I was stupid, told me I couldn't live without him, told me no one would ever want me. Her voice cracked, but she kept going, like the words had been trapped inside her for so long that finally speaking them hurt and healed at the same time. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward, she said softly. He said it would never happen again. She gave a bitter laugh, small, broken, empty. It happened again 2 days later. The cowboy lowered his eyes, not out of discomfort, but out of respect for the pain she was spilling onto the forest floor. I tried to leave 3 times, she whispered. He always found me, always dragged me back. She held her arms around her body, hugging herself as memories shook her bones. He always said the same thing. If I can't have you, no one can. The cowboy exhaled slowly, the sound deep and low. But still, he said nothing, just letting her speak in her own way, in her own time. The last time was last night, she said, her voice almost gone. He kicked the door, hit me. Grabbed the gun. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. I thought he was going to kill me. The cowboy didn't tell her she was right. He didn't tell her the man had come very close to fulfilling that threat. He didn't tell her the man in the black truck would never hurt her again. Simply said, "You're not going back." She turned toward him slowly, her eyes wet but fierce with a small spark of hope. "You don't even know me," she whispered. He shook his head, adjusting his hat as he stepped closer. "I know enough," he said. "I saw fear. And I saw someone running for her life. I don't need more than that." She stared at him, stunned. No one had ever stood for her without a reason. No one had ever protected her without asking for something in return. No one had ever said she deserved better. The cowboy began walking again and nodded for her to follow. "We're heading to a safer place," he said. "It's quiet, hidden. No one will find you there." She wiped her eyes, took a shaky step, and then another. Each step felt like a step away from the past and toward a life she didn't believe she could ever have. As they walked side by side, she held the shirt tight around her, like it carried strength she didn't yet have inside herself. Her story had finally broken the silence, and with every word she spoke, she felt a tiny part of her fear weakening, a tiny part of her courage returning, a tiny part of her heart learning how to beat again. The cowboy didn't look at her while she talked, but the way he walked a little closer, just enough to shield her from the cold wind that said more than any words could. They walked for almost an hour through the forest, following a narrow trail covered in pine needles. The girl kept holding the cowboy's shirt around her body, the sleeves nearly brushing the ground. Cold wind moved through the trees. But the fabric kept her warm. She felt safer than she had felt in months, maybe years, but fear still whispered in the corners of her mind. Fear that the past was still chasing her, even if the cowboy said she was safe now. The cowboy led the way, steps slow so she could keep up. He didn't look back often, but he listened to every crunch of leaves, every shift in the wind. He was the kind of man who noticed everything, a protector, without saying he was one. Soon the forest opened slightly, revealing a narrow dirt path that curved around a hill. At the top of that hill, hidden by thick trees and wild bushes, sat a small wooden cabin, old but strong, silent but welcoming. She stared at it with wide eyes, unsure if it was even real. It looked like something out of a life she had never been allowed to dream about. The cowboy stopped at the bottom of the hill and turned to her. "This place doesn't show on any map," he said quietly. "No address, no mail, no visitors." Her breath caught in her chest. It sounded like a place that belonged to a ghost, but also a place where no one could ever find her. He began walking up the hill, and she followed slowly, each step echoing with uncertainty and hope. The cabin was made of dark logs, the roof patched in places but sturdy. A small porch wrapped around the front. With an old rocking chair sitting in the corner, grass grew wild around the steps, and a rusty horseshoe hung over the door like silent protection. "This was my grandfather's," the cowboy said as he pushed the door open. He built it with his own hands. There was pride in his voice, but something softer, to memory, maybe even love, inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and old stories. Dust glowed in the sunlight coming through the small window. There was a wood stove, a small bed, a rough wooden table, and shelves lined with tools and old books. It wasn't fancy, not at all, but it felt warm, real, safe. Safer than any house she had ever lived in. She stood in the doorway, afraid to take another step, afraid she didn't belong anywhere that felt this peaceful. The cowboy noticed her hesitation and said gently, "No one will find you here." She swallowed hard, her throat tight with unspoken tears. She stepped inside slowly. Like she expected the floor to disappear beneath her feet, he placed his saddlebag on the table and opened a small cabinet. "There's food, blankets, and a kerosene lamp," he said. "Water's from the well outside." He spoke in a calm tone, like he was giving a tour of a secret world meant only for her. She walked to the window and looked outside. All she saw were trees, birds, sunlight, and silence. A silence that didn't hurt, silence that felt like healing, but she turned suddenly, a thought hitting her heart like a stone. "What if he comes looking?" she whispered. The cowboy placed his hat on a hook and said simply, "He won't." She didn't know the truth behind his voice, didn't know the man in the black truck was no longer walking the earth, didn't know the cowboy had already done what needed to be done. But something in his tone made her believe him, truly believe him. For the first time since she ran into the forest, he opened a drawer and took out a folded blanket. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. "I'll bring supplies, check on you. Make sure you're all right." She stared at him, confused. "You'd do all that for me?" He looked at her without blinking. "You needed help." It was the simplest answer she had ever heard, and the one that hit her the hardest. She ran her hand along the edge of the wooden table, her fingers tracing the scratches and marks left by another life. A life where someone built something with care, with steady hands. A life very different from the one she escaped. Then she asked quietly, "Will you? Will you come back soon?" The cowboy didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, "and the day after that, if you want me to." She looked down, hiding her trembling lips. "It would. It would make me feel safe," she whispered. The cowboy nodded once, like he'd already made that decision long before she asked. As he stepped onto the porch to chop firewood for her, she stood in the doorway, wrapped in his shirt. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something warm grow inside her. Something small and fragile but real. A feeling she thought she had lost forever. A feeling like hope. The cowboy rode into town the next afternoon. The sun high and sharp above the dusty main road, his horse moved slow, steady. Like it had done this trip 1,000 times, people in town always noticed when he arrived, not because he tried to draw attention, but because he was the kind of man who carried silence like a a silence that made other men lower their voices and move out of his path. He tied his horse outside the local bar, a place where ranchers gathered after long days. The wooden sign above the entrance swung slightly in the breeze, creaking softly. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey, dust, and old stories. Men played cards in the corner. Others leaned back in their chairs, boots crossed, hats tilted. The sound of laughter echoed through the dim room, but it fell quiet the moment the cowboy stepped in. He walked to the counter, ordered nothing at first. Just stood there with his hands resting on the worn wood. The bartender, a gray-bearded man with more wrinkles than memories, nodded to him. "Been a while," he said slowly. The cowboy nodded once, had things to handle. The men in the bar exchanged glances. Everyone in town knew when the cowboy said things, it usually meant trouble had come to someone foolish enough to bring it. Whispers started at the tables, quiet at first. Heard someone went missing in that old pine stretch, black truck, right? Saw the sheriff towing it in last night. Weren't no one inside, though. Tracks ended by the river. River don't wash away everything unless nature's in a hurry. The cowboy didn't react. He didn't turn his head, didn't blink. He simply asked the bartender, "Anyone been asking about a woman?" The bartender's hand slowed as he wiped a glass. "A few," he said, lowering his voice. "Two men came in this morning. Said they were looking for somebody." The cowboy's jaw tightened. Though barely visible, what did they look like? "Big boys," the bartender said. "Angry, noisy, smelled like trouble." Trouble, the cowboy knew, didn't die just because one man in a black truck disappeared. Trouble always had brothers, friends, shadows that followed behind it. As he stood there, the door of the bar swung open hard. A tall man walked in, shoulders wide, beard unkempt, eyes sharp. Behind him came another man, skinnier, meaner looking. With a cigarette hanging from his lip, the room went still again. Everyone knew these weren't ranchers. They didn't walk like men who worked the land. They walked like men who hunted. The tall one spoke first, voice loud and impatient. "We're looking for a girl," he announced to the room. "She's little dark hair, been missing 3 days. He kicked a chair out of his way. "Anyone seen her?" The cowboy didn't turn around, but his hand slid along the bar, steady as a river. The bartender swallowed hard. No one answered the men, not a single soul. Townfolk weren't brave. They weren't stupid. Nobody wanted to be the reason gunfire rang out in a crowded bar. The tall man's eyes scanned the room until they landed on the cowboy's back. He smirked, nudging his companion. "That him?" The skinny one whispered, "Looks like the type." The tall one muttered. They walked over. Boots thudding against the old wooden floorboards. The cowboy didn't move, didn't even look their way. "Hey," the tall man said, "you seen her?" The cowboy didn't answer, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. The tall man laughed under his breath. "You're going to answer me," he said, voice turning sharp. "We know she ran through these woods. And someone's hiding her." The cowboy's fingers brushed the edge of his coat. Not shaking, not rushing, just ready, if he needed to be. The skinny one leaned forward. "You keeping her?" he hissed. The cowboy slowly turned his head, just enough for them to see his eyes, cold, steady. Dangerous eyes, the kind of eyes that ended arguments without words. Something in those eyes made the tall man freeze. His breath caught, his confidence shook. A man who had fought many fights suddenly felt very small. He backed up a step, then another, his boots scraping the floor. We'll be back," he muttered. But even he didn't sound sure anymore. They left the bar fast, pushing through the door into the sunlight. The room exhaled a breath it had been holding. The bartender leaned in close and whispered, "They ain't done." The cowboy nodded once. "I know," but neither of them knew the truth. The men weren't going after the girl. They were going after the cabin, following rumors, footprints, and the wrong kind of desperation. Inside the bar, the cowboy moved toward the door, his steps calm but filled with silent fire, because he knew something those men didn't. He knew exactly how far he would go to protect the girl in his shirt. And how far he had already gone. The cowboy rode fast through the forest that evening, faster than he ever had before. The men from the bar were gone, their truck tearing up the dirt road, kicking dust into the sunset. He didn't need to hear their plan, didn't need to follow their tracks. He knew exactly where they were heading. The cabin, the girl, the one person he had sworn to protect without ever saying the words out loud. Branches slapped his coat. The wind howled in his ears. The horse breathed hard beneath him, but it kept going, strong and loyal. The forest thinned near the hill, and he saw smoke coming from the cabin chimney. Relief hit him for a moment, and fear cut through it. If she lit the stove, she didn't know danger was coming. She didn't know she needed to hide. He jumped off the horse before it even stopped and ran up the hill, boots pounding the ground. The door swung open the moment he reached it. There she stood, still in his shirt, sleeves rolled up, cheeks pink from the stove's warmth. She looked small, fragile, almost glowing in the golden light of the cabin. But her smile faded the second she saw the worry in his eyes. "What happened?" she whispered. He didn't lie, didn't soften the truth. "2 men came into town," he said, breathing heavy. "They're looking for you." She pressed a hand to her mouth. Eyes wide with panic. Are they coming here?" He nodded once. "I reckon they're on their way." Her legs almost gave out under her. Fear wrapped around her chest like a cold rope, but before she collapsed, he stepped forward and caught her by the shoulders. His hands gentle but strong, steady, anchoring. "You ain't alone," he said quietly. "I won't let them touch you." Something in his voice melted her fear just a little, just enough for her to breathe again. He closed the cabin door and bolted it, then went to the window. He opened a small wooden box and took out a second rifle. He placed it on the table beside his own. The girl stared at the weapons, her voice shaking. "You're going to fight them. I'll do whatever it takes," he answered without hesitation. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with certainty, as if protecting her was simply the most natural thing in the world. She stepped closer, gripping his sleeve. Her voice soft but desperate. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked at her, long and steady. "You needed help," he said, repeating the words he'd told her before, but this time they meant something deeper, something he wasn't ready to say out loud. Before he could continue, the distant rumble of a truck echoed through the trees. Her breath caught. He moved her behind him, guiding her gently but firmly toward the back of the cabin. "You stay low," he whispered. "You don't come out till I tell you?" She grabbed his wrist suddenly, tears rising in her eyes. "Please don't leave me." He placed his hand over hers. "I ain't going far," he said, voice warm like a promise. "Just where I need to be." The truck engine cut off at the bottom of the hill. Voices rose, angry, confident. Boots stomped against the dirt. The cowboy stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The men walked up the hill with loud steps, guns at their sides, bravado dripping from every word. But their confidence froze when they saw him waiting on the porch, rifle in hand, stance unshakable. "You hide in her," the tall one demanded. The cowboy didn't answer with words. He answered by cocking the rifle, a slow, undeniable sound, a warning, a line drawn. The men exchanged looks, realizing too late that they weren't dealing with fear. They were dealing with a man who had already gone further than they could imagine, and who would go further still before they could raise their guns. The cowboy fired a warning shot into the dirt at their feet. The echo thundered through the forest. "You ain't talking her anywhere," he said calmly. "Turn around." The men cursed, stumbled back, muttered threats they didn't have the courage to stand behind. Eventually, they ran back to their truck. They didn't try again. They didn't dare. Minutes later, silence returned to the hill. The cowboy walked back inside the cabin. She ran into him the moment the door closed, her hands shaking, her face buried in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, steady and warm, letting her cry, letting her feel safe. "I thought you'd leave," she whispered between breaths. He shook his head. "I ain't going anywhere." She stepped back slowly, wiping her eyes. She looked down at the flannel shirt she wore, her voice breaking softly. "I kept this because it made me feel like someone cared." He touched the collar gently, his rough fingers brushing the fabric. "It's yours," he said, "unless you'd rather have something else of mine." She blinked, confused like what. He took her hand, held it like it was made of something rare and precious. "My name," he said quietly. Her breath caught. Her heart stopped, then fluttered like wings. You mean forever." He nodded. "If you want it." The cabin felt warmer suddenly, the air thick with something fragile and beautiful. She didn't speak, didn't need to. She stepped closer and rested her forehead against his chest. "I want it," she whispered. Outside, the forest held its peace. Inside, The woman who once ran for her life now stood wrapped in the shirt of the man who saved it. Not afraid, not running, finally home.